Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and there has recently been an awful lot of talk about KONFLIKT47. And that's because it's just been announced. That's kind of how these things work. The second edition KONFLIKT47 starter set and quite a few stuff, kind of other things around the release, have all been announced recently. And it got me to thinking, what of my collection have I got from first edition? Because it has been said that all of the models from first edition are still going to be usable second edition. Now, exactly what that means, whether they're just the same units updated with nice new models, and you can kind of use the old or new models kind of interchangeably, or whether that means that there's actually new units that are going to be the cool new ones, and then the old models, old units, yeah, technically they're in the game, but they're not very good. We'll see how that turns out when that turns out. But I went through my collection and worked out all the bold action stuff, all the historical stuff. That's great. Done a lot of stuff on the channel about that. But where's the KONFLIKT47 stuff, and just how much do I have? And actually, it's a fairly interesting collection, because I've kind of done a little series on painting the armoured officers, because in first edition KONFLIKT47, those were just my favourite models, and that's the stuff that I wanted to paint the most. But I have quite a few other things as well. So let's just go through what I've got in my collection and compare it to the second edition stuff and see what, maybe if I can find an excuse to buy some more models. We'll see about that. So first up is the Italians, and I have a grand total of absolutely nothing, which is a shame, because the Italian, or I believe it's the North Italian armoured suit, is actually really nice, but they never released it as an officer's version. They only released the infantry, so that's a box of 10. And I don't like it for 40 quid for a box of 10 enough. But the North Italian armoured suit had this kind of really Roman style to it. The Southern Italian, they're kind of joined the Allied side, so they're using Allied equipment. The infantry have the American Firefly jump packs, which is actually a really cool unit. And their heavy suits are the Galahad, the British version with a slightly different helmet. I believe some other modifications as well. But I never got around to buying them. So let's move on to number 2, which is the Japanese. And unfortunately, as you can see, I haven't quite gotten around to painting them just yet. I base coated them. I should probably get stuck in, given that I have quite a lot of Japanese on my painting table at the moment as we speak. That's probably a good time to get those done and actually finish them off before second edition comes out. Can I manage it? Probably not. Let's see if I can try. But for the Japanese, I have the 3 models of the Armoured Officer, and I have the Scorpion Light Walker. And the Scorpion is actually one of the few first edition KONFLIKT47 walkers that I actually like. There's something about the aesthetic of most of them that I'm just not a fan of, and it's kind of a shame, because I'd really like some of the British heavy walkers, but I just don't like the style. But the Scorpion for the Japanese is a really cool model, and I've decided to paint it just like I'm painting my officers in this kind of bright samurai blue. I'm going the same way with my Scorpion Walker and making it look like it's fallen out of Ghost in the Shell. For my British, I actually have kind of a similar small number, in that I have the Armoured Officer here, the 3 models of the Armoured Officer unit in the Galahad suit, which I think is really cool. It's kind of got that slight medieval knight aesthetic, which is pretty cool for the British. And then on top of that, I also have the Sherman Tesla. Now, strictly speaking, the Sherman Tesla is from the American starter box, and I'll get to the Americans in a moment. But while I was building my Brits and Americans, I bought the American KONFLIKT47 starter box so I could use the American infantry for my Americans, and then the Sherman as a Lend-Lease vehicle for my Brits, which would also then give me the Tesla turret for my British. And with the Armoured Officer as well, that's at least a start, but it's not a great deal. And actually, of note for the officer himself, just on this one model, I swapped out his gun, because originally he had an M1 Thompson, And I just don't... Why would... Yuck, rubbish. You either have a 28 Thompson, the cool one, or you go for something British, because he's a British officer. Why would he not have something British? And I was thinking maybe I go for a Lancaster or a Sten. Lancaster for the classic style, Sten because there are loads of them around. But for Konflikt 47, they're kind of looking forwards into the stuff that came out in the mid-40s, maybe even all the way up to the 50s. And the Sterling submachine gun is the exact thing that fits that bill. And so I cut off the Thompson and added a 3D printed Sterling. It's kind of a shame the way he's holding it. You basically can't see the Sterling submachine gun at all. So there's that. For the Soviet Union, however, I think I have the largest collection of all of my Konflikt 47 stuff. And I think the total is 16 models. And that's because not only do I have, similar to the Tesla Sherman, I have the T-34, which again came with the historical 85 turret, and also the kind of energy cannon version, the sound cannon version for Konflikt 47. I also have, as you might expect, the Armoured Officer trio. I actually think that it was the Soviet Armoured Officer that got me into getting all of the Armoured Officers for all the factions. But then I also have a bunch of the Daughters of the Motherland. And these are really cool because, as is sort of not really known in any degree of accuracy, the Soviet Union did employ women in frontline roles in the military historically. It's not as progressive as you think it is. They certainly were not treated as equals. But in terms of the kind of the story, the lore of Konflikt 47, the Daughters of the Motherland are actually a genetically enhanced super soldier, and they have AK-47s. And given that, you know, Konflikt 47, these are the brand new, probably milled pattern, kind of Type 1 AK-47, which is pretty cool. And I bought the box of 10. And that comes with, actually it's got 2 with RPDs as well. But I also got 2 with the energy shield. And I'm going to have to look up what these are called. But the energy shield is kind of 2 Daughters of the Motherland carrying these things. And they jump into another unit to give them protection. When I was reading the rules, I didn't necessarily understand what these were exactly for. Because the normal Daughters of the Motherland have body armor, and so they have a similar protection anyway. And the Armored Officer, which I got, also has like this heavy armored suit. And so you kind of can't or shouldn't really put it with those units. And what that means is that I have to have some other unit to put the energy shield team Daughters of the Motherland in with. And I never got around to working out exactly why that is. And that's probably because I never actually played Konflikt 47 First Edition. But also amongst them, there's actually 2 that are kit bashes. And I've got one of them here. There's definitely some Warlord games going on. I've got Project Z. One of the heads is definitely a Frostgrave model. And I think the legs are from Spellcrow perhaps. And I distinctly remember that I 3D printed the bodies because I needed to get the hammer and sickle on there. And so 2 of them are kit bash, but they do include some Warlord parts. But that means that there's the whole massive extended squad of Daughters of the Motherland, which I might actually split up into the RPD squad, kind of whatever the minimum size is for that, and then an assault squad that are going to shift around. That's kind of makes sense, although maybe just a big blob of them is going to be effective as well. And that just leaves the 2 factions that are going to be in the starter set for 2nd edition Konflikt 47. And we can have a look at the Americans and the Germans now. And it's going to be far, far quicker if I look at the Germans first, because I have a grand total of 4 models for them. As you might expect, 3 of them are the Armoured Officer, and the 4th is a limited edition model that Warlord Games made when they were first using the KOFLIKT machines. So this is the Warlord Resin Plus. And as I understand it, Warlord were kind of testing their own mix of stuff and feeding back to the KOFLIKT company about what works, what doesn't, how to improve on things. Warlord Games have a lot of experience. The people involved in that company have been in wargaming for a very long time. So yeah, when they say something, when they say they've tested something and they've come up with a good idea, you listen. But I did just adjust the pose a little bit to make it a little more natural. I don't actually have a photograph of what it looked like before, but sure, it's fine. I think it looks cool now, but that means that I've got 4 of the old style armoured suits. And when I looked at the new armoured suits, and let me just bring that up in front of me here, they're an extremely different style, but also they're armed differently. Because the armoured suits from first edition, the original set, were armed with Sturmgewehrs. I believe they're the Sturmgewehr 44, although there might be a modification of that. They're not the 45, which makes sense, because the 45 was simplified for ease of manufacture, whereas the 44 might be considered the slightly nicer version. But if we look at the kind of second edition stuff that's coming with the starter set, these suits are much, much bigger. Not only are they on 40mm bases rather than the 25s that I've put the older ones on, and I believe they came with 25mm bases anyway, so they're chunkier and bigger in that regard, but the weapons are actually doubled Sturmgewehrs. So this is a concept that bounced around in the 50s and 60s, probably before and since as well, where 2 assault rifles were glued together or built as one piece in most cases, to test the idea that firing 2 rounds simultaneously rather than a tenth of a second in full auto, there's a little gap between them. If you fire the 2 at the same time, by having 2 weapons, kind of the action of 2 weapons merged together, is that more effective? And technically, sort of, maybe, but also the weight and the complexity of having 2 guns merged into one just isn't worth it. But the Soviet Union did this with the AK-47, 3 of them. The Americans did this with various weapons. As far as I'm aware, historically this was never done with the Sturmgewehr, but that is certainly what we're using in Konflikt 47, which makes total sense. There is historical precedent for this type of thing happening, and they look cool. But what that means is that when I try to use my old models with normal Sturmgewehrs, and how is that going to work with the new models? Because they're armed differently and they're tiny in comparison. Can I just use the new rules and kind of just old models, new rules kind of thing? I assume that my gamer group will let me, because they're a friendly bunch of chaps like that. There's also going to be an officer. So he's got this bright red sash and the double Sturmgewehr as well, which means that my original officer is probably going to have to stand aside and let the new one take over. And that means I'm going to have a total of 11 of the combined, 4 of the old and 7 of the new armoured suits. But on top of that is another one of the walkers, and the new walkers from Konflikt 47, some of them, again, I said I don't really like the style of the walkers that much, but the one I sort of did like was the Spinner. And the Spinner had this kind of dorky look to it, 4 legs, open tops. I kind of liked it. I never got around to buying it. The new version is called the Vogelspinner, which directly translates as bird spider, but is actually the German word for tarantula. So the correct translation is tarantula there. And the new Vogelspinner just looks so much cooler. It has 6 legs, which is still not 8, but it's getting there. But the armoured hull, it has that very strong 1940s design. It almost looks like a 1930s armoured car that they've put legs on. It kind of looks like a 222 or a BA-64 or something like that, that they've put legs on. It might actually have some geometry from that. It would be interesting to look into that. But just overall, this model looks so much cooler than the older one. But that's the Germans out of the way. So I've got 4 heavy infantry at the moment. That's my entire collection. And it will eventually be 11 plus the Vogelspinner. But the next collection, which is going to be my largest collection when I eventually get the starter box and will overtake the Soviet Union, which is currently my largest collection, is the Yanks. Now, my current collection first. I have the 5 armoured infantry suits. So these are the heavy armoured suits from the infantry squad that came with the Konflikt 47 starter box. I also, as you are probably coming to be familiar with, have the armoured officer as well. There's 3 there. As I understand it, in the first edition rules for Conflict 47, you can't take the armoured officer until you have at least 2 squads of the armoured infantry. And the minimum size is 5, so I've got 1, but I would need to go and buy another 5, and they only come in squads of 10, so I'd have to buy a box of 10, so that I could then use the armoured officer, which I couldn't be bothered to do. Again, I haven't played the game, haven't played first edition in the slightest bit. And so what I actually chose to do instead was to say that the officer is actually not the officer. The officer is just an NCO. And so the 3 of the officer team and the 5 of the regular squad are going to combine to make 8 models in the regular squad. On top of that, what also came in the Conflict 47 box is the Coyote, the Jackal. I need to work out which one it actually is because I keep saying it wrong. Okay, it's the Coyote. They look extremely similar. They're essentially the same base suit, but the Jackal has the airdrop capability and the Coyote is the infantry version, so that's the one I've got, the Coyote. But I also have converted some models again for the Americans. But rather than just expanding the squad of the Daughters of Motherland by 2, which is what I did for the Soviet Union, I actually created an entire small squad for the Americans. And that's because I found I believe this was Wyndham Graves' version of the Lehetra tractor cycle, which is an absolutely terrible idea that keeps popping up. As well, if a car can be turned into a tracked vehicle by replacing the wheels with tracks, surely we can do the same thing with a motorcycle. Except when you replace the 2 wheels of a motorcycle with a single run of track, you can't turn anymore. But regardless of the practicality of these things being absolutely ridiculous, they do look cool. And so I decided to print up a bunch of them, and then I glued a bunch of plastic parts to them. They're Warlord Games plastic bits from the American kit, and that is my squad. I've got 6 of them, 3 with carbines and 3 with submachine guns. Now, as we were about to mention from the new starter set for 2nd edition, I might end up with a few Tesla Thompsons left over, and they just look cool. As we've mentioned that already, let's have a look at the starter set, because that does in fact include a bunch of stuff for the Americans. And we'll start with the biggest thing, because it's, to me, the least interesting thing, the linebacker mech. This is, I think, a medium mech this time, whereas the Vogelspinner and the Coyote are light mechs. And the Scorpion as well, light mech. So this isn't actually one that I personally like. It's cool, big stompy robot, great, but it's just not a style that I like, and I'm not sure why I don't like the style of the K-47 mech vehicles. Maybe painting it in a different style will help me like it. I certainly kind of got over my dislike of the Coyote. I went from not liking it at all to kind of liking it. Maybe the same thing can happen for the linebacker. But we've got a big stomping mech with a massive cannon, big energy gun, great. But there's also, much more interestingly, is the Firefly troops. Now these are probably one of my favourite units from 1st edition, and I certainly was interested in picking them up. I never got round to it though, and so the fact that these guys are in the new starter set is definitely very interesting for me. So these have these energy propulsion jetpack kind of things with little wings on them. That's cool. And they also have the Tesla Thompson, which, as I've mentioned, is one of the coolest things that I've seen for the new releases. Just kind of a normal M1 Thompson at the back with some kind of Tesla system around the barrel. So does it use normal ammunition and then supercharge it in some way, or does it use specialist ammunition? I have no idea. We'll find out when they get released, probably. But these also have a bunch of specialist weapons as well, flamethrower and missile launcher. So these are going to pack an absolute punch. And they come with an officer. The platoon commander for the Americans has a Firefly jetpack as well. And that's interesting, especially for me, as I've moved my armoured officer into kind of the infantry squad to make that squad of 8, rather than a squad of 5 and an officer of 3. So I'm going to have the Firefly officer instead. So that makes perfect sense for me. So with the Firefly officer, 12 Firefly infantry, 8 heavy infantry, and the Coyote, and the linebacker in terms of mechs, that is a brilliant collection for my Americans. Now, I don't know the points costs for any of these units just yet, and so it's going to be a big old who knows when it comes to actually working out what that means. But certainly once I get the starter set, my biggest collection will be the Americans, followed by kind of the Soviets and the Germans being about the same. I don't know exactly who will be in the lead there, but once we start playing, I'll be certainly getting some more. And as more models get released, well, you're hardly gonna stop me. But speaking of the other kits, there is one unit that I am quite annoyed about, and that is the Nachtalben, the Nightmares. Now, there is a KONFLIKT47 first edition version of these units, and I think that the first edition models are much more sinister. They're much more human-like, which makes them that much more unsettling. But the new models, I do prefer the new models in a lot of ways. They are really cool. They've got loads of teeth, they've got spines, they're disproportionate as well. Absolutely fantastic, love them to bits. But these guys only come in the Axis Starter Army bundle. And that's annoying, because this bundle comes with the Vogelspinner, which I'm getting in the starter set, 3 Armoured Infantry, which I'm getting in the starter set, the Officer, which I'm getting a different sculpt of Officer in the starter set. It might be nice to have the 2 different sculpts to kind of bulk out the numbers and look more interesting, so maybe that's not a bad thing. But then there's the Panzer IV mech with legs, and as mentioned several times, I'm just not a fan of the kind of medium and heavy mechs in KONFLIKT47. Pretty much the only ones that I actually really like are the old Scorpion and the new Vogelspinner. For me personally, I'm not going to buy this box just to get this one unit. Like, that's not how this works. When that unit gets released separately, when the Nightmares are either in a different box or by themselves, I'm more likely to pick them up then. But at the moment, yeah, I'm not picking them up. I'm not buying a bundle just to get one unit. Warlord, you can't pull those tricks on me. So, is there anything else in the first edition collection on Warlord Games that I'd be interested in picking up before they inevitably go out of stock? Well, perhaps, because there's a lot of models there. There's actually a lot more than people realise. Warlord Games did put in the work to get an expansive collection for all 6, or more likely 5, or more likely 5 and 2 halves of the kind of the historical World War II nations. But in KONFLIKT47, they had a very different feel to them. And there are a few things that I might like the look of. I'm not sure if I want to immediately grab the old kind of first edition KONFLIKT47 models, or if I want to maybe wait until we get the second edition version of these. I think I mentioned already in this video, for the Italians, I would like to get an officer's version of the North, I think it's the North kind of Roman inspired armor, because I think that's cool, but I don't want a whole squad of them. For the Japanese, there is one unit that I don't have and I've been kind of half looking at, and that is the Shibito, or Shabito. Kind of not zombies, but everyone calls them zombies because that's what they understand. And these are kind of the battlefield fallen of many nations revived and come back to cause havoc. But they're not zombies in the Western sense. They do retain the personalities of their original kind of personhood. And so I kind of like the idea of kit bashing up some more Shibito. I've got 3 so far. If I can get another 7 to make a nice round box of 10, or a nice round squad of 10, that'll be great. So as I've said several times, I like the armoured officers. Or rather, I like the armoured suits, and the armoured officers are the smallest collection. Well, in KONFLIKT47 first edition, there was an interesting collection of kind of artillery teams, kind of crude ground artillery guns, with the armoured suits as crew. But I think the understanding is that these towed artillery weapons have much shorter range than real artillery because they're energy cannons and whatever they're used over shorter distance. And so the crews are in much more danger, and so giving them the armoured suits makes more sense. And I think that they just look cool. There's some slightly different poses from the officer and different poses from the infantry versions of them. And so, do I want to pick these up? I don't know. They do look cool though. And I think finally, just before we wrap up the video, I'll mention the British Automata with Vickers Maxim machine guns or the American M2 Heavy. These are kind of just fun in their own right, kind of old-fashioned automata with the Brody helmet on top. They're just fun. They're a fun little unit. But here's the thing. All of the other models are just that little bit better in the new version. The new Fireflies look fantastic. The new Nachtalben look fantastic. The Folgerspinner, definitely I prefer the new version. Do I get some of the British Automata now? Or do I wait for them to release a new version? Because if they release a new version as a plastic kit, if that's on the horizon, if that's coming, I think they might just be really, really cool. Well, let's stop speculating because I've been talking at you for far too long now. I am definitely, as you can probably tell by the fact that I've talked for half an hour on this video already, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to Konflikt 47, and I already have a decent collection of Americans and they're in the starter set, so that's probably what I'm going to focus on first. But as new stuff comes out, it's just whatever the coolest models are going to be is whatever I'm going to use. That's almost certainly how it usually works, but I have such a collection of bolt action that I can just throw in with any army with my historical models and use whatever kind of K47 models I happen to have for that faction at any given moment. And like I said, it's going to be the Americans up front with both the heavy armoured infantry and the Fireflies and the mechs. So, with all of that said, am I ready for Konflikt 47? I've no idea. I've got a bunch of models and I'm looking at buying more, so that's probably me hooked. But if you have any comments in the comment section down below is where they go. You can suggest some of the units that I have missed out on, some of the older ones, or perhaps something that's upcoming, because there's been some pictures of the new stuff that I haven't pointed out in this video yet. And that just leaves me to say, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.